Men and women of Reddit, what made you not want a second date with someone? Many years ago I agreed to meet a lady in a coffee shop for a date. She turns up with 4 screaming kids in tow who climb all over the chairs and just about wreck the place. I paid for our coffees and took my leave lol. She spoke really loudly all through the movie in the theater, yet hushed at anyone who made the tiniest of sounds. On a first date at a coffee shop, the guy picked up my foot. I was wearing cute sandals. He rubbed my foot for a second and I was like WTF. Then he put all of my toes in his mouth. At the table. In the coffee shop. Showed me his giant back tattoo of a demonic jack in the box while in a bookstore, a date location he picked, and I foolishly thought we might have interesting discussion on reading. Turns out, he rarely read and it was just the only place in my city he was familiar with. I met a girl at work who decided to invite me over to her house to hang out. Everything was cool until I went to the bathroom. The bathroom was an absolute wreck, hadn't been cleaned in maybe years, there was scum and hair everywhere. I could have dealt with all that, but when I raised the lid to take a piss I saw a turd floating in some water and pee with a piece of toilet paper over it. She had just been in there a bit before myself. I flushed, peed and then called it a night. She kept talking about how life was supposed to be enjoyed to the maximum. Basically, how she spent lavishly on expensive Italian, French or Japanese dinners and trips, making her constantly broke and constantly borrowing money from other people to sustain her lifestyle. She considered it classy. I considered her delusional. Unsurprisingly, I ran for the hills, as fast as my legs could carry me. No thank you. We went for a 1-hour walk, and during that time he let me say about a total of 10 words and spent the rest of the time talking to me about his money or answering his own questions. Only time I refused a second date was when the guy looked nothing like his photos, I think they were at least 5 years old, and asked the same questions all in the span of like a 1.5-hour date. I felt like he wasn't even listening or paying attention to my answers, so at the end of the date I said it was my cat's dinner time and left. He also asked weird questions like what I thought of him and that he could handle honesty because he was confident. What? He boasted about driving drunk and crashing his car. He kissed me and then started growling like a dog. Was your date DMX? X gone give it to you. Not me, but happened to my roommate at the time. He had met a girl online, talked to her for about a week and set up a date. They were to meet at the mall and go to a movie across the street. I went with him to the mall, had to pick a few things up, we split and he called me about 10 minutes later. Turns out the girl he was meeting invited 2 other guys that she also met online because she only had 1 free day a week and wanted to explore her options. She showed up at the bar already so drunk that she could not walk without my assistance. 1, she drove herself there. 2, it was 2 in the afternoon. 3, she wanted to continue drinking as soon as we met there. She criticized absolutely everything. The car I was driving, clothes I was wearing, cologne I chose. We were supposed to go bowling, dinner, and then drinks. When an attendant came over to ask if we wanted anything, ordered my snacks and asked if she wanted anything. You mean you don't know? What kind of date is this? Halfway through our game she mentioned was bringing up the wrong conversation topics. Thankfully my brother called me out of the blue asking to borrow some fishing gear and I played it as work calling me in. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. When I first met him, he kept standing way too close to me, and his breath smelled like cigarettes. Throughout our date he would start looking around and be clearly listening to surrounding conversations every time it my turn to speak. Like the moment he would stop blabbing he would be looking everywhere to listen to anything but me. At one point he sneezed into his bare hand, looked at it and said yucca, and then wiped it on his pants. An hour or so into this, he interrupts me mid-sentence, a sentence that he was paying 0 attention to of course, and says, in what sounded like an attempt at a sexy voice, "Hey, wanna get out of here?" I, seeing it was the late hour of 9 p.m. still said, "Oh, hey, well it's getting late, I should get home." I was grateful when I didn't hear from him for a week, before he texted me asking to hang out again while I was at an event and couldn't really respond right away. He gave a snarky follow-up an hour later because I hadn't responded, which I thought was hilarious because of the hypocrisy. Anyhow, told him I didn't think it would work out and that was that. It was my first and only blind date which a mutual friend of ours set up. She arrived and parked in a disabled space, got out of the car telling me she uses her nan's disabled pass, which didn't sit well with me but carried on anyway. We went bowling and to dinner. She was really rude to the service staff in both places, which I found embarrassing and uncomfortable. Cut the dinner short, paid, left, and never saw her again. This happened last week when we got to the good old what you do for a living. She straight up tried to sell me in on her MLM scheme when I politely noted I wasn't interested, but I am happy to go back to our previous discussions. She got argumentative in the good old salesperson losing a client kind of way when it was clear the mood was ruined and we weren't going anywhere from there. I stood up, paid for our drinks at the counter, and got out bonus points for some of my friends coincidentally sitting at the table behind us. I could see them, and giving her weird looks as she was ranting about the life-changing opportunity that pretty much solidified my thoughts. She was on her phone 60% of the date. Edit. Respect to all those that commented. Figured LD elaborate more. Met with her for drinks. Following a greeting/smile/hug, her head went back down to her phone. Asked if she wanted to grab something from the bar, and didn't lift her head when she told me what she wanted, nor did she come to the bar with me. Okay. Shitty. Whatever. I was definitely in a state of mind at the time that I just wanted to try things out, gain experience, roll with the punches. The other 40% of the time was basically her talking about herself. That I can bear with. Not great, but bearable. It happens. That's part of the idea, get to know the other person. But most of that was about her shitty ex and how terrible their breakup was. Sadly no back and forth or basic conversation etiquette. Definitely got out of there politely and soon, never looked back. To be clear, because a lot of comments were focused on it, no heartbreak on my end. Purely just a bad date. Happily with someone now. Was really into this girl, we had some real chemistry going on. Until she started in on her obsession with Fleetwood Mac. I didn't realize it was a true obsession until the point where I was honest and said I wasn't really into them, but wasn't put off by their music. She flipped her shit. Started cussing and telling me to apologize to her or get the fuck out of her house, in front of about 6 other people. So I left. About 2 weeks later a mutual friend asked why I stopped trying to hook up with her. Apparently she thought I was going to come back later that day and apologize, lol. I had more in common with the chaperone she brought to the ice cream shop, and didn't seem to have anything to say that wasn't as a godly person. Like, fine, you brought someone to make sure I wasn't a creeper, I understand that, but when you make it very clear that it's your youth pastor acting as the chaperone, and invite him to sit at our table, then say nothing until the pastor felt bad enough to break the silence to talk to me. Maybe don't cry and ask why I don't want a second date. Edit. To clear things up a little bit, we were 18, I think she was a bit older, maybe 19-20, and in college it was my first ever date in my life. We'd spent about 2 hours talking the day before the date and really hit it off. No indication of the church stuff until she walks in with the pastor. I think bringing him was her choice, but I'm not sure. Either way, she was fully into the church stuff and asked me after our date if Elle wanted to come to church with her. And kept asking and asking and asking. I think she was trying to get me to join the church more than she wanted to date me, because I saw her in a church group later in the year rather aggressively asking people to come and throwing pamphlets into people's arms, and a female friend of mine had a similar experience with a guy from the group, and the same youth pastor. She didn't come to the first one. Arrived 40 minutes late with no text to say he would be. Turned up with his laptop and said he needs to do some work and gave me some cash to get him a coffee and something I want. I was like okay sure and stood in the queue watching him as he put on his headphones and opened his laptop. I came back with the drinks and he said he just needs to finish this and took a call. I just sat there for another 40 minutes with zero conversation and him typing/chatting away. This was a Saturday by the way, and he scheduled the time. After he finished he said let's go to a bar and get a proper drink. We had a chat and I tried to get to know him, but he was being an arse. He ordered the drinks and then started having a go at me for not offering to pay and went on a rant about double standards. TBH, I was still pissed off about waiting around for 90 minutes and was not in the mood to pay for his drink or see him again. She had already put our pictures through one of those what would your baby look like apps and started talking about how we would raise them. He spoke over me the whole time. At the end of the date he said LD been too awkward because I hadn't spoken much, so he was going to fuck me next time he saw me to break the ice. Needless to say, I did not see him again. He lived with his ex. Haha, one guy I went out with told me he lived with a roommate. It was his not yet ex, yeah. Not divorced, lol. The dude and I had texted and bonded over the fact that we both liked drawing, and decided a fun way to get to know each other on our first date would be to bring our sketchbooks and share what kinds of things we draw. I brought along my little Moleskine sketchbook. He brought an accordion file filled with one-page comics. He then proceeded to read every single comic out loud to me, with character voices. There were dozens of comics. His enthusiasm was fine. It was the fact that he never even asked me to share my art with him, and instead made sure I was his audience the entire evening, instead of an active participant in the conversation. Later in the date, while we were taking a walk, he pointed out a park bench and told me a story of him and his ex-girlfriend aggressively making out on it. In the middle of the day, while surrounded by picnicking families. No thanks. Nice and simple. A nice girl gets it out of the way early. I guess I better tell you that I'm going to expect you to stop talking to any other girls you might have in your life. She then explains, yes, everyone, no, she's serious, she gets jealous easily. That one was the only first date I ever ended early. Even the one where the woman brought her little brother I saw through. She wouldn't make a single decision. We had a couple hours to wait for dinner. Elle asked if she wanted to get drinks at the bar and talk or if she wanted to window shop and enjoy the Christmas lights, heavily decorated part of the city. Don't care, whatever you want to do. After we sat, we looked at the menu. She put hers down. I inquired what she had decided on. I don't know, I'll probably just order whatever you're getting. Asked what she did for fun. I shop. Sometimes I go to the casino, that's it. It was absolutely impossible to start a conversation with her. She asked me no questions the entire 4 hours we were on our date. We'd been to lunch a few times, but this was the first real romantic date. We met in biology class in college. She was gorgeous and smart and had a smile that could melt diamonds. I was in a group project with her and took her to lunch, and she confessed she had a crush on me. So we kissed before going back to class and made plans for a date and went out that night. And we had a wonderful time. Until about the time she asked me what my deal breaker for dating was. As in, what trait would someone have that would immediately make me break it off? I said something like I wouldn't date a racist or a puppy kicker. Someone who had a sociopathic streak, or was mean, stuff like that. She said that she could date all kinds of guys, fat, skinny, black, white, it didn't matter. The one thing she could not abide, the one kind of guy that she absolutely, positively, would never, ever, like ever be with, was a guy with a hairy back. I'm Iranian. The end. When he took my hand and stroked it whilst calling me his little strawberry. Met a guy on Tinder who seemed nice and ended up going for lunch and a movie. He said he would pay for lunch and I said I'll pay for the movie and popcorn as I had a voucher to use from my birthday. I meet him and within 30 seconds I realize he has an intellectual disability. He told me straight away that he had lied and his friend had been the one messaging me as he couldn't read or write very well. I'm not an asshole, and as everything was paid for, and I wanted to see the movie, I still went with him. It looked like I was his carer taking him for an outing. Lies and deception, never a good start. Met a girl on a dating site. We chatted about 2 weeks, got along pretty well. She invites me to come to her place for a date. When I get there, there's a U-Haul truck outside. Turns out she's in the middle of packing up and moving to another state, and just wanted help with the heavy lifting. She hadn't mentioned any of this in our conversations. At first I thought maybe it was a roommate moving out. Or something like that. When she made it clear she was the one moving, I just said, well, good luck with the move then, and got the heck out of there. 1. Picked her up outside her house. 2. She told me we might want to go to a different movie theater in case her brother sees us. 3. She insisted she was 18. I turned around and dropped her back off at her house before I had a meeting with Chris Hansen. Matched with a guy on Tinder in 2014 while I was in grad school and new to the city I was living in. He seemed cool enough and lived in a small town about 45 minutes outside my city. He offered to take me out for dinner, and I agreed and said I would meet him at dinner. in regard to my own safety. He insisted on picking me up and showed up with a liter of Fireball and sat down on my couch and started pouring shots of it for me and my roommate. He seemed like a genuinely nice guy, just oddly misguided in that I was not interested in binge drinking Fireball before dinner. He ended up drinking nearly all of it and tried to hook up with me. When I rejected him, he wanted to drive home despite being completely wasted. I forced him to sleep on my couch and locked the door to my room. We never spoke again, but he did try to add me on Snapchat about 4 years later. My time to shine. Went on a date with a guy, who I have dubbed PowerPoint Guy. He arrived at our first date, coffee, with a literal presentation of non-negotiable demands he required from a future partner, including, but not limited to, must be housewife, produce him 2 boys and a girl, in that order, gender specified, not work or desire a career, move 500 miles away to live on an acreage in his parents' house, with them also living there, not have any male friends, but he also wanted someone who is open to sleeping with whoever he chose so he could watch. The list goes on. He didn't ask me a single question about my life or interests. Just spat out this list of stuff and talked about himself for 2 hours, at which point, I politely bailed. Props to this guy for knowing what he wants. But PowerPoint Guy did not land a second date with me. Her boyfriend that I knew nothing about showed up. I was telling a story about airport security trying to confiscate a brick of cheese that had become quite soft after a few hours out of the fridge and how I just ate the whole brick out of spite. He kept interrupting the story to make jokes comparing the cheese to his flaccid penis. At the end, after he tricked me into hugging him, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "Next time, vagina." To start, he was nearly 30 minutes late to the restaurant, blamed traffic for being so late, even though we don't live in a city. He was a little drunk when he turned up, but I can understand if he was a little nervous beforehand. I ordered a meal and he ordered 3 beers for himself. After he downed a few, he proceeded to tell Mel was a 70 UT of 10, and to get to a 10 I should get plastic surgery so I can be a model. I told him repeatedly that I was happy with the way I looked, but he kept going on and on about what I should get done. After LD finished eating, I said I'm going to pay for my meal then head home. He wanted to go to the bar and convinced me to go with him. I ordered a drink then turned around to see him leaning over a couple of young ladies, who looked pretty uncomfortable, so I put my drink down and left. I sent him a text the next day saying it isn't going to work and blocked him. 1 week later I get a call from an unknown number and it's him mom. She tells me about how he came to visit her and told her all about me, and how happy she is that her boy has finally found someone, then invites me to dinner, which I turned down. Actually, I mentioned this situation the other day in another post but without details. I was at the mall one summer day hanging out with some friends. I see this guy who looked like a friend of mine, so I walked up to him only to find that he was not that friend. He was cute, we introduced ourselves, exchanged pleasantries, gave me his beeper number, old, and we planned to go get coffee sometime. I was a hot spooky chick and he was a hot spooky dude. The day arrived. It turns out he worked at a Red Lobster down the road from my house, so I walked over there to meet him after his shift ended. We went to go see The Craft in the second run theater. We held hands, kissed during the movie. We went to go get coffee after and we chat. What year are you? Going to be a junior this fall. Cool, I didn't go to college. College. Oh god. How old are you? So that's the story about how 2 strangers vastly underestimated each other's ages. I thought he was 17 to 18, he thought I was around 20. I was 15 and he was 25. He took me right home and we didn't go out again. He said, yeah, you're an engineer now, but once you get pregnant you'll move away from working though, right? Just so many assumptions in the one statement, hadn't even gotten our food yet. Broad and bold assumptions with little to no data, an immediate red flag for any engineer. Laughed when I told her about an allergy. Decided to test it by adding some of her sauce to my plate while we changed tables. We had been seated next to a small, extremely well-behaved child. She requested the move. I got that tingle, the sweats, and labored breathing. I ended up having to rush to my car to get my AP pen. She confessed, and I left her there. She still reaches out to me when she sees me on dating apps. She wanted to look at wedding dresses as a first date. Dear God. I recently went on a date with someone who's a good guy but unloaded on me emotionally for longer than an hour. I tend to present as a good listener and this happens to me sometimes. I appreciated what he was sharing, but he didn't ask me questions in return and I didn't have space in the conversation for it to be an equal exchange, though I tried. If it starts to feel like I'm your therapist and it's not a two-way conversation, that's a deal breaker. I went to this guy's house and we made pizza, drank wine, and watched a movie. I was nice and drunk/full by the time we started watching the movie. He picked the movie. I forgot the name but it was the older movie with Angelina Jolie's dad and that guy found that old town and got raped by some hillbillies. The guy who I am chillin' with goes, "Wow, what would you do in that situation?" I'm like, dude, I don't know. That's a weird question. Then after that rape scene he leans in for a kiss and aggressively grabs my boob, then just stops and sits back up like nothing happened. It was time for me to go home. He drove and then he ran over some traffic cones on the way back. I thought we were for sure going to get in an accident. That made me not want a second date. Went on a date with this guy. We get Indian food. Every time I speak he interrupts me. He made me watch a 5-minute long anime trailer / with no subtitles / even after I politely told him that I wasn't into A, anime or B, the genre of the trailer he insisted on showing me. All he talked about was Marvel movies and anime. And then he slurps the white sauce. Actually raises the little container to his mouth and just slurps it. Made the most disgusting sound. I never thought frickin' table manners would be a deal breaker I came across in my 20s, and yet here we are. First date was uneventful. We talked about what we did, our backgrounds, upbringing, etc. Vapid, nebulous stuff. This was late afternoon Saturday. We parted and I went to a pub to meet some friends. The following morning I slept late, and opened my phone to a barrage, around 4, of messages from my date. She's listing all the things I should have done or said better, what she found annoying, etc. I'm looking through it pretty damned hurt. I started to write what I thought, wow, there's no need for that, just say thanks and bye, but remembered to not text when emotions run high. That afternoon, another message, when do you want to try again, think it could be fun. This time I did respond, never. Explaining to me the different forms of scat fetishes in great detail. He was the most attractive guy I had ever dated. Unfortunately he was not passionate about anything. He was just kind of there. He invited me to smoke a joint with him at his house. Turned out he lived with his mom. That's okay, so we smoked in the garage with giant cockroaches running around. That's not okay. He left me at the restaurant with the bill when I was in the bathroom. Last blind date I went on. I went to a casino late one night with a guy from college. It was the only place open at 1 a.m. Was in a big party stage. I told him I'm broke so I only had one drink. He had quite a few. It was time to leave and we got the BLL. He said he had to go draw money from the ATM to pay and left to do it. I waited a while for him to come back, then I went to the ATM to find him and couldn't. So I texted him asking where he was and he just sent me the emoji with the tongue out. The staff at the casino detained me in a room and took my ID. They were very harsh and interrogating me. My dad had to drive through at like 4 a.m. to pay the bill so I could leave. I'm now banned from that casino. She wanted me to join her multi-level marketing. Said the only way she could get platinum is if she marries someone who is in the multi-level marketing and they combine their sales. We were having a good conversation, then he randomly threw in thanks for meeting up. I've never tried a chocolate girl before, as though he was going through flavors at Baskin-Robbins. I noped out shortly thereafter. She was dismissive and rude to the restaurant wait staff, and kept bringing up her religion and how important it was to her despite never mentioning religion in any of our previous communication. I kind of felt like she was fishing for something but I couldn't figure it out and it just made me sour on her pretty quick. We had an early dinner and were going to take a walk and catch a show afterwards, but I called it off after just the dinner. She didn't seem to care. Haven't ever felt like a date was a waste of time more than that. Just goes to show sometimes no matter how well you seem to get along with someone online and in texts, face-to-face encounters can be wildly different. We'd been talking on Tinder for like 6 months. Date went really well. He was super sweet and chatty. Right at the end he said, I thought your profile pictures were beautiful, and you're even more beautiful in person. I was like, wow, that's a lovely thing to say. Until he finished it with, and your breasts are even bigger than thought. Are they still perky, or do they sag? The waitress was standing next to us. We both just stared at him, then I asked for the bill, paid it in full and left. The stench. Even though you don't have much money, fucking deodorant is $1. Met outside the bar. It was summer and I was wearing a mini skirt and t-shirt, casual/nice. We went inside, sat close to the bar and split nachos, and the conversation ran the gamut, touched on politics, his previous job, movies, poker, which happened to be on TV, and something that he did in his spare time. Apparently his friend was in a tournament that was being televised. It was pleasant enough, wasn't totally feeling it, but felt the conversation was flowing nicely from topic to topic and appreciated that. He left to go to the men's room, came back and proceeded to comment on my skirt, touched my leg and asked me if I was wearing any underwear. Then asking me what color and type I was wearing. I didn't respond but commented how we'd gone from all these topics to now talking about my undergarments, and he would not divert from that topic. We laughed and he insisted on walking me to my car and also asked that I drive him to his car, which was in a parking lot. I deliberately parked in the lane of the parking lot, which was one-way and circular, as it would mean someone would eventually need to honk to get past. He tried groping me as I held my hands up like I was in a bank robbery stick up and said I'm uncomfortable. And then someone drove up behind and I said, "Oh, gotta move," and he had barely closed the door when I took off. She talked about her ex-girlfriend of a few months for about half the date, then proceeded to explain to me how she sexually assaulted her ex when her ex didn't want to have sex with her yet. I kept asking to leave, my things were in her car, but she kept saying that she was having a good time and that she loved that I was such a good listener. I texted my sister to come get me, and when informed my date of this, she got upset with me, and made me tell my sister to go back home, because she wanted to drive me home instead. She even texted me the next morning and told me she had a great time and wanted to see me again. I've never blocked someone so quickly. I posted this on another thread, but I briefly dated someone who told me that he has a fetish towards suicide victims and did it with several. He called his previous sexual partners crazy and fucked up, which is what I saw as the major red flag. By briefly dated I mean it ended after he told me this. We met outside his apartment and I could tell he had bathed in cologne from 8 feet away. I could deal with that, decided to ignore it. We said hi, he looks me up and down and says, "Yeah, you're cute enough, haha." Appearances aside, he wasn't exactly a looker himself. I decided to let that comment slide. I say the most ridiculous shit when I'm nervous, so I chalked it up to awkward like me and can't talk good when nervous. We went to get lunch. He then proceeded to tell me all about working at Domino's. Specifically, how annoyed he was at getting promoted to manager, so now he can't say racist shit to his co-workers anymore. He chose to share some jokes about Asian people. This was in public at a faux restaurant and he was not quiet. I ghosted him after that. She pushed and drowned a bee in her molten vanilla ice and laughed. And saw a chessboard in my cabinet, said "Ew, who plays chess?" Turned around, saw a book on my table and said, "Who reads?" I only read billboards. He was a friend of mine, so I expected him to be a decent person. But it started with him wanting to meet up at his place, and not listening to me saying no. I told him that it was either meeting somewhere in the city, or not meeting at all. So he proposed a bar somewhere and I decided to give him another chance. We had just ordered our second beer when he proposed to go to his place. After the beer, when Elle said no, he said, "Aw, but come on. I bought a good bottle of wine and even practiced a piece on the piano especially for you." It felt like he was trying to make me feel guilty, so I felt even more uncomfortable and said no again. And then he started raising his voice, saying, "It's always the same with women. Why can't you just act normal? What is wrong with you?" At this point the other people at the bar were looking at us and it felt like he was trying to shame me into leaving with him. So I stood up, downed my beer, and left. She was clearly not over her ex and talked a lot about her dad in a worship kind of way. When walking me home, he stopped and explained he couldn't go any farther because someone in my neighborhood had a restraining order against him. He also showed me a picture of himself with a dead bear immediately after I told him I was vegetarian. He was somehow shocked that I wasn't interested in seeing him again. I actually feel bad that I wasn't honest with why I didn't follow up with her, but a while ago I went on a date with a girl who was seemingly very sweet and very attractive, probably out of my league. We had a good time hanging out at a bar/restaurant and we liked a lot of similar things, and she was studying to be a nurse and had an internship. Cool. But then she told me that part of her internship was helping with schizophrenic patients as well as other mentally handicapped individuals. And one thing she thought was hilarious was to fuck with them. She told me she liked to mess with the schizophrenics by telling them things like, "Yeah, I really am out to get you," and things of that nature. When she said this, I just said that my grandmother was heavily schizophrenic and it's a very serious and harsh problem, and I felt bad for them. It ended the conversation, but the date proceeded for a bit longer before ending and we parted ways. She definitely wanted to do it again, but I just couldn't after that. Not sure if she just kind of said something she thought goofy in the moment and didn't actually do those things, but either way it was a deal breaker for me for sure. I also had no actual clue where she worked, so before anyone asks, I couldn't have really reported her or anything like that. A lady I knew used to hassle me about taking her out one night. I was friends with her sister at the time and she said her sister was keen to go out with me. Even her mother wanted me to take her out. So we arranged to go for a drink. She turns up with another guy who just sits there and says nothing the whole time. After about 30 minutes of awkwardness, she says to her friend, "Right, shall we make a move?" And off they go. Fast forward 3 or 4 years and we're at her sister's wedding. Girl I took out starts moaning at me for not taking her out again. I just smiled and walked away. Different guy, I told him I'm not much of a kisser even before the date, that I show intimacy in other ways. The day had been great. Then at the end he was catching the train, and just before he jumped on he leaned in to kiss me, which I dodged, and he went straight on the train. 'Cause he'd left it at an awkward time. Just as he was leaving, I didn't have chance to hug him or do anything else. Rather than responding maturely, he sent me loads of insults over Snapchat, then 2 days later claimed his mate sent them and he wanted to see me again. Went to a restaurant for dinner and he proceeded to get drunk. Kept putting his hands on me in weird spots like my head, grabbing my shoulders and grabbed my chin like a grandpa. I suppose he was a better date than Coleslaw Man. She said her paintings caused tornadoes in the Midwest because she put swirls in it. She started talking about Jesus to the point of crying. I was into her up until that point. Went out with this young lady who thought it was fun to bash me all night. I have a good sense of humor, but about the 5th time she called me stupid I was done. She was boring and full of herself. I finally asked her what the fuck her problem was and she responded that she was just joking and I was sensitive. I finished the date. I could tell it was awkward for her, but luckily I don't have problems with confrontation. I told her she was just being sensitive and get over it. I took her home and didn't get out of the car, open her door, or walk her to her door. I think another issue with her was when she found out I cut grass as a second job. This was late 80s. She mocked that and turned her nose up at it. When I responded I made over $25 an hour doing that, she looked at me, shocked, but still found it embarrassing. This is tame for most of the responses here. I dated around a lot when younger. I only went on one blind date. I never went out with someone didn't get to know at least a little. I couldn't imagine how I would deal with some of the mental cases reported here.